Hey everybody, Backpacker Luke here, and in case you haven't noticed, I'm holding two separate coats with me today, and what we're going to be talking about is the difference between synthetic down insulation and natural down insulation. All right, let's get into it. So obviously when I'm talking about insulation being natural or synthetic, I'm talking about what is created in a factory and what is created through natural process or in nature. So those are the two separate types of insulation we'll be talking about today. And insulation like this is most commonly found in jackets and coats, as well as sleeping bags and some other stuff, but we're mostly gonna be kind of talking in terms of sleeping bags and jackets today. So now we'll get into it. The first one we'll be talking about today is synthetic insulation. I'm gonna be using this jacket as the example. This is a jacket made by Arc'teryx. It's a Canadian-based company. They make really great coats and jackets and clothing and outdoor gear and all that kind of stuff. I highly recommend them, to be honest. I'm not sponsored by them, but I do love them. But this one in particular uses synthetic insulation. So what I'm talking about when I say synthetic insulation is that it is made in a factory, and synthetic insulation is most commonly made in sheets of insulation. I'll put a photo up on the screen for you so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. But it's basically just sheets of insulation that is made at different thicknesses to give it its different warmth ratings. And what they do when they are creating the jacket is they put the insulation inside here and they sew it into the jacket inside the layers of the jacket to give it its insulation. The good thing about synthetic insulation is that it's really easy to work with. I have used synthetic insulation when I have created backpacking quilts for myself. I've used synthetic and natural insulation, like down actually, so we'll talk about that later. But it's really easy to work with because it's essentially just sheets of insulation that are kind of made out. And I'll put a photo up on the screen for you so you can see what I'm talking about. But it's really easy to sew into anything, fabric or sleeping bags, jackets, all that kind of stuff. It's just really easy to put in there because it's just sheets. So it basically gets sewn in with the material and you're good to go. The other type of insulation that you might encounter, which is natural goose down insulation. Sometimes they will use duck down, which is kind of a confusing term, honestly. But usually they use goose down, so that's what we'll be talking about today. So goose down is basically on every goose, there are two separate types of feathers. There's like the outer feathers that are kind of the harder ones, and they're usually going to be there to protect the goose against the wind and the elements and that sort of thing. And then the inner feathers, which is what's in here, are used to give insulation and heat and warmth and breathability to the goose. And they aren't as good at protecting against the elements, but they are very good at dispersing heat and giving heat and just doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is insulation. So that's what's inside this jacket. All right, next we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of synthetic insulation and natural goose down insulation. So we'll be getting into that in just one second. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'm going to show you one of the biggest reasons that I actually recommend one over the other. But you guys stick around to the end of the video for that. And also, while we're at it, if you like this kind of content, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. All right, let's get into it. As promised, we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of each of these. I'm basically just going to be doing these back and forth. So I'm just going to hold both jackets up and you'll see what I'm talking about with each of them. And like I said, I have some at the end of the video for you that gives you like the really big reason that I recommend one over the other. With synthetic insulation, it is very good at resisting the elements. So you could actually dunk this jacket in a bucket of water and then put it right on. Now it's going to be cold and wet water, and it's going to be soaking wet, but the insulation value of the jacket will actually basically do the same. So it's much more resistant to the weather than natural down insulation is. Natural goose down, if it gets wet, will begin to sort of clump together and it loses that heat value that it has, because natural down, how it works is it's essentially taking the air between all the little pockets, the little air pockets between all the down insulation, the natural down insulation, and it heats that air in between each of the feathers and creates that insulation value from that. So when goose down gets wet, it clumps up and it kind of squishes down and loses its fluffiness, which also gives it less air pockets to heat, and then it loses a lot of its value. With synthetic insulation, you don't have that issue. No matter how wet you get it, it's still just a sheet of manufactured insulation, and it's going to do its job whether it's wet or dry. Now, like I said, if you're wearing a completely soaking wet jacket, you're going to be cold for other reasons, but the insulation isn't that reason. It's the fact that it's cold and wet. Another pro and con between the synthetic insulation jackets and the natural down insulation jackets, and this does vary, so I'm just going to give you that caveat right now. It can be different than what I'm about to say, but in general, it's kind of a rule of thumb. Synthetic down jackets are generally going to be cheaper because they're more mass produced. You don't have to work with natural elements. You don't have to kind of work with animals, all that kind of stuff. So just manufacturing synthetic down, you're really only limited as a manufacturer with synthetic down by how much you can churn out at one time. Whereas with natural down, it's a process that is dealing with live animals, so you kind of have to work around that and figure all that out, and it's a lot more logistics. So in general, a synthetic down jacket will be cheaper for the same kind of heat rating and value that it gives you as a down jacket will. There are exceptions to this. For instance, this jacket is actually much more expensive than this jacket. A lot of that has to do with brand, so I'm just going to give that caveat right there. So this is our Arc'teryx, in case you're wondering, and this is from a company in Japan called Uniqlo. So you can look those two up and you can see what I'm talking about, but that is another thing. Another difference between synthetic insulation and natural down insulation is the weight between the two. Synthetic down insulation will pretty much always be heavier, whereas down insulation jackets will almost always be lighter, especially for the same heat value. So if you have a synthetic jacket that is a very lightweight jacket going up against a down jacket that is a very heavy down jacket, like very warm down jacket, you might get the same weight, but in general, a synthetic jacket will always be heavier than a down jacket. So there you go. All right, the moment you have been maybe waiting for is the big one that I was kind of teasing at the beginning of the video, is the reason that I'll pretty much always pick a down jacket, a natural down jacket over a synthetic jacket, is this right here. So this is the synthetic insulation jacket, and this is about as much as I can pack it. I've already spoken about how it's heavier than a down jacket, but this is about as small as you can make it right here. All right, and now the down jacket, and actually comes with its own stuff sack, which should tell you something in case you haven't seen the other video that I've kind of made about this, which I'll link in the video for you so you can go click on that and watch that if you'd like. But right here, in just a couple of seconds, I was able to stuff the down jacket into something this small. And this is actually just as small as the drawstring allows the pouch to go. It will actually get smaller than that. So you can see that right there. So that's how small the down jacket gets. It's lighter than the synthetic jacket, and it actually squishes down sideways too. So when you're packing for backpacking especially, but even if you're just packing to go on any other kind of trip, you can throw a down jacket in your suitcase or in your backpack, and it'll basically just fit to whatever size and shape you need it to. Whereas the synthetic insulation jacket just kind of stays about this size. So there's the difference right there. And this is the reason I will pretty much always pick a down jacket over a synthetic insulation jacket. I hope that's been helpful for you in understanding the difference between synthetic insulation and down insulation. Using the jackets was really just the simplest and easiest way that I could think of to show you what I was talking about and the differences between them. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.